December 10, 1898. Paris, France. A treaty is signed. Price $20 million. Item purchased an entire archipelago of 7,107 islands. Population included 7 million people. The seller, Spain. An empire in terminal decline. The buyer, the United States. A nation that had spent 122 years declaring that empires were evil. The transaction violated every founding principle of American democracy, but the United States signed anyway. The justification, strategic necessity. The reality, economic calculation. And within 48 years, the United States would give it all back. Not because of morality, because of arithmetic. This is the story of the Philippines. The colony that taught America an expensive lesson. Traditional empires cost too much. Better to control nations through money and military access than to govern them directly. This wasn't defeat. It was evolution, from empire of land to empire of money. The United States didn't plan to acquire the Philippines. It planned to liberate Cuba. On February 15, 1898, the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor. 260 Americans died. The cause was never definitively determined. But newspapers didn't need facts. They needed villains. Remember, the Maine to hell with Spain became the rallying cry. On April 25, 1898, the United States declared war on Spain. The goal: end Spanish colonial rule in Cuba. The Teller Amendment, passed 2 days earlier, explicitly stated the some side, would not annex Cuba. This was supposed to be a war of liberation, not conquest. But wars have a way of expanding beyond their original mandates. On May 1, 1898, 1 week after the war began, Commodore George Dewey's Asiatic Squadron sailed into Manila Bay, 7,000 miles from Cuba. Dewey had orders to destroy the Spanish Pacific Fleet. He did. The Battle of Manila Bay lasted 7 hours. The Spanish fleet was annihilated. Not a single American sailor died in combat. Dewey reportedly said to his gunner, "You may fire when ready." Gridley. It became one of the most famous quotes in American naval history. But Dewey had a problem. He had destroyed the Spanish fleet. But he didn't have enough troops to occupy Manila. So he waited. And while he waited, Filipino revolutionaries led by Emilio Aguinaldo seized control of nearly the entire archipelago. By June 12, 1898, the Philippines had declared independence from Spain. The revolution was already won. The Americans had simply shown up for the final act. When peace negotiations began in Paris, the Philippines became the central issue. Spanish negotiators argued that Manila had surrendered after the armistice was signed. Therefore, the Philippines couldn't be claimed as a spoil of war. American negotiators countered, "We control Manila Bay, and possession is 9/10 of the law." President William McKinley faced a decision. Should the United States annex the Philippines, or allow it to become independent? McKinley later claimed he prayed for guidance and concluded that Filipinos were unfit for self-government. This was convenient logic. The real calculation was strategic. If the United States didn't take the Philippines, Germany or Japan might. The archipelago sat at the crossroads of Asian trade routes. Control of the Philippines meant access to China, the largest untapped market in the world. McKinley made his choice. On December 10, 1898, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Spain ceded Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States. Cuba would become independent, at least in theory. The price for the Philippines, $20 million. Nominally to compensate Spain for public buildings and public works. In reality, it was a purchase. The United States had bought an empire. The U.S. Senate ratified the treaty on February 6, 1899. By a single vote, 2 days earlier, fighting had already begun between American troops and Filipino independence forces. The war to liberate the Philippines had become a war to conquer it. The The Philippine-American War officially lasted from February 1899 to July 1902. In reality, fighting continued until 1913. The numbers tell the story of miscalculation. American casualties: 4,200 soldiers dead, 1,020 in combat. The rest from disease. 2,930 wounded. 125,000 troops deployed over 3 years. Filipino casualties: 20,000 combatants killed, 200,000 civilians dead, mostly from famine, cholera epidemics, and wartime devastation. Financial cost: $400 million in direct military expenditures in 1899 dollars. Adjusted for inflation, that's approximately $14 billion in today's currency. To put this in perspective, the United States paid Spain $20 million to acquire the Philippines, then spent $400 million to suppress the independence movement. A 20-to-1 cost overrun. This was not a conquest. It was an investment disaster. The Philippine-American War was brutal. American forces burned villages. They implemented civilian reconcentration camps, herding rural populations into garrison towns where disease killed thousands. They used torture on suspected guerrillas, including the water cure, a precursor to waterboarding. Filipino forces retaliated with ambushes, assassinations, and attacks on civilians who cooperated with Americans. General Arthur MacArthur described the conflict as requiring the most stern and unrelenting application of military power. Translation: Total War. American soldiers sent letters home describing the carnage. One Philadelphia newspaper published a letter from Manila in 1902. Our men have been relentless. They have killed to exterminate men, women, children, prisoners, and captives, active insurgents and suspected people from lads of 10 up. This was not the war Americans had been promised. Anti-imperialist movements erupted across the United States. Mark Twain, Andrew Carnegie, and William Jennings Bryan all condemned the annexation. But the war continued. By 1901, Emilio Aguinaldo had been captured through a ruse involving forged letters and American soldiers dressed as Filipinos. On July 4, 1902, President Theodore Roosevelt declared the insurrection over. The Philippines was now an American colony, and the cost-benefit analysis was already turning negative. Colonies are supposed to generate revenue. That's the entire point of imperial expansion. Extract resources, exploit labor, and enrich the metropole. The Philippines failed at this. Problem 1. No valuable resources. The Philippines had sugar, coconut, hemp, and tobacco. But so did dozens of other tropical regions with cheaper labor and lower security costs. There was no gold rush, no oil boom, no mineral wealth that justified military occupation. Problem 2. No captive market. American businesses had hoped the Philippines would become a guaranteed market for American goods, but Filipinos were too poor to buy them. Per capita income in the Philippines in 1900 was 1/10 that of the United States. Problem 3. Garrison costs. Maintaining military control was expensive. The United States kept tens of thousands of troops stationed in the Philippines for decades. Suppressing the Moro Rebellion in the Southern Islands required continuous military operations until 1913. Every year, the Philippines cost the U.S. Treasury more than it generated in trade revenue. Problem 4. Political liability. The annexation of the Philippines turned the United States into a hypocrite on the world stage. How could America preach self-determination while denying it to 7 million Filipinos? The contradiction was impossible to reconcile. By 1916, American policymakers realized that direct colonial rule was unsustainable. The solution: grant limited self-government while retaining strategic control. The Jones Act of 1916 created the first fully elected Philippine legislature. It also included the first official U.S. government commitment to Philippine independence. Eventually, the preamble stated that independence would be granted as soon as a stable government can be established. No timeline, no binding commitment, just a vague promise that could be delayed indefinitely. For 18 years, Filipino leaders sent independence missions to Washington. They lobbied Congress. They reminded American officials of the promise. They were politely ignored until the Great Depression changed the calculation. By 1934, the United States had a new reason to abandon the Philippines' economic protectionism. During the Depression, American farmers and workers demanded protection from cheap Filipino imports. Sugar from the Philippines undercut Louisiana sugar producers. Coconut oil from the Philippines undercut American vegetable oil manufacturers. Filipino laborers migrated to California and competed for agricultural jobs at lower wages. American labor unions wanted them gone. At the same time, maintaining military bases in the Philippines cost money that Depression-era budgets couldn't justify. On March 24, 1934, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Tidings-McDuffie Act. It established a 10-year transition period for Philippine independence. On July 4, 1946, the Philippines would become a sovereign nation. The United States would no longer govern it. But here's the critical clause buried in the fine print. Arrangements for naval reservations and fueling stations shall be negotiated after independence. Translation: we're giving you independence, but we're keeping our military bases. On July 4, 1946, the Philippines became independent. President Harry S. Truman issued Proclamation 2695. Officially recognizing Philippine sovereignty. The American flag was lowered in Manila. The Philippine flag was raised. Speeches were made about freedom and democracy. But one day later, on July 5, 1946, something else happened. The military bases agreement was being finalized. On March 14, 1947, it was signed. The terms: the United States received 99-year leases on 23 military bases. The largest were Clark Air Base in Pampanga, 130,000 acres, Subic Bay Naval Base in Zambales, 62,000 acres, the size of Singapore. The United States retained full sovereignty over these bases. Filipino law did not apply within them. American personnel could not be tried in Philippine courts. The bases were American territory on Philippine soil. For free. Let's do the math. From 1898 to 1946, the United States spent $20 million to purchase the Philippines, $400 million to suppress independence. From 1899 to 1902, hundreds of millions more in annual governance and military costs over 48 years. Total investment, conservatively $1 billion in 1946 dollars. From 1947 to 1991, the United States retained Clark Air Base and Subic Bay Naval Base. Clark was the headquarters of the 13th Air Force and a critical logistics hub for the Vietnam War. Subic Bay was the largest U.S. naval base outside American territory, servicing 60% of the 7th Fleet. Both bases cost the Philippines in lost sovereignty and environmental damage. Both saved the United States tens of billions in alternative basing costs. The United States gave up direct colonial rule but retained strategic control. This is neocolonialism: control without conquest, influence without annexation, empire without the expense of governance. The Philippines taught American strategists a fundamental lesson. Owning territory is a liability. Controlling access to territory is an asset. Traditional empires, British, French, Spanish, spent fortunes garrisoning colonies. They built schools, roads, hospitals, and bureaucracies. They suppressed rebellions, trained local militaries, and managed complex societies. The costs were enormous. The United States realized there was a better model. Grant independence, establish military base agreements, provide economic aid to ensure friendly governments, maintain access without responsibility. After 1946, the United States applied this model globally. Japan, independent, but hosting U.S. bases under the Security Treaty. Germany, independent, but divided with U.S. Forces in the West. South Korea, independent, but hosting tens of thousands of U.S. troops. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain sovereign, but permitting U.S. military installations. The pattern was clear. The United States would no longer annex territory. It would negotiate access, not conquest. Contracts, not colonies. Client states. The Philippine bases operated for 45 years. Then, in June 1991, Mount Pinatubo erupted, the second largest volcanic eruption of the 20th century. Ash buried Clark Air Base under feet of volcanic debris. A typhoon struck simultaneously, turning the ash into wet concrete. Buildings collapsed. The base was declared a total loss. The United States evacuated 18,000 civilians in the largest American evacuation since the fall of Saigon. Clark Air Base was abandoned. Negotiations over Subic Bay continued. On September 16, 1991, the Philippine Senate voted on whether to renew the base's agreement. The vote 12 against, 11 in favor. By a single vote, the base's agreement was rejected. On November 24, 1992, the last American sailors left Subic Bay. For the first time since 1898, there were no American military bases in the Philippines. The cost to remove toxic waste and contamination an estimated $40 million per base. The United States paid $17 million, 1% of its domestic base cleanup budget. The cleanup bill was left to the Philippines. The bases closed in 1992. But American influence didn't end. In 1999, the Philippines and the United States signed the Visiting Forces Agreement. It allowed temporary deployment of American troops without permanent bases. In 2014, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement was signed. It granted the United States access to Philippine military facilities for rotational deployments. By 2023, American forces had access to 9 Philippine military sites. No permanent bases, no sovereignty issues, just access. Same strategic benefits, zero governance costs. So why did the United States buy the Philippines in 1898 and give it back in 1946? Because it learned a fundamental principle of modern empire. Land is a liability. Access is an asset. The old model, Spanish, British, French, required direct control. It required administering justice, building infrastructure, and managing rebellions. It required soldiers, bureaucrats, and budgets. The United States spent $20 million to buy the Philippines and $400 million to suppress its independence movement. Then, it spent 48 years discovering that colonial governance was financially unsustainable. But instead of abandoning the Philippines entirely, it innovated. It granted independence while retaining military access. It replaced colonialism with base agreements. It replaced annexation with alliance. The Philippines remained within the American sphere of influence, but the costs of governance were transferred to Manila. This wasn't generosity. It was efficiency. The British Empire collapsed because it couldn't afford to hold its territories. The French fought ruinous wars in Algeria and Indochina, trying to preserve theirs. The United States avoided this trap by abandoning territorial empire before it became fatal. What the United States built after 1946 wasn't an empire of land. It was an empire of leverage. Economic aid replaced direct taxation. Military alliances replaced annexation. Cultural influence replaced colonial education. The Philippines became independent in 1946, but it hosted American military bases until 1992. Its military was trained, equipped, and advised by Americans. Its economy was integrated into American trade networks. English remained an official language. The United States didn't need to govern the Philippines to control it. It just needed to remain indispensable. This is the neo-colonial model: control through dependence, not domination. Influence through necessity, not force. And it's far cheaper. The annual cost of maintaining Clark and Subic was measured in hundreds of millions, but the strategic value, force projection across the Pacific, deterrence against Soviet expansion, logistics support for Vietnam, was measured in trillions. The United States got 45 years of rent-free access to the largest naval base outside American territory. The Philippines got independence that came with permanent American military presence. Both sides could claim victory. Neither was entirely wrong. The Philippines was America's laboratory for modern imperialism. It proved that traditional colonialism, annexation, governance, direct rule, was economically irrational, too expensive, too unpopular, too politically risky. But it also proved that empire could evolve. You don't need to own a country to control it. You just need to make it dependent. Economic aid, military protection, trade agreements, and cultural influence achieve what annexation never could: willing subordination. The Philippines chose to host American bases because it feared external threats. It chose to align with American foreign policy because it needed American markets. It chose to adopt American institutions because American advisors funded them. This wasn't coercion. It was incentive alignment, and it cost a fraction of what colonial rule would have demanded. From 1898 to 1946, the United States spent approximately $1 billion acquiring and governing the Philippines. From 1947 to 1992, the United States spent $0 on rent for Clark and Subic, but gained access to military infrastructure worth tens of billions. Net result: the United States got 94 years of strategic access to the Philippines. The first 48 years cost a fortune. The next 46 years cost almost nothing. The lesson was clear. Empire of land expensive, unpopular, unsustainable. Empire of money cheap, deniable, indefinite. The United States gave up the Philippines not because it lost a war, but because it found a better way to win.